Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Deepa Iyer and I am with the Building Movement Project and Solidarity Is. Really pleased to have you all here. What we're doing this afternoon and what we've been doing every month is doing a series called the 10 Social Change Roles Explained. So today, we're going to be working with one of those roles, which is the role of the healer. And every single month, we are doing particular roles. So we've done a few already. And if you'd like to catch up on the roles that we have already explored, you can do that by going to Building Movement Project and looking at our series. So I'm so excited to have you all today here right now, and I think it's a very important time to be talking about healing. And so if you're joining us, I'd love to know what is your personal weather forecast right now? Not what is outside, but how are you doing? I'd say that for me, I'm a bit foggy, which does not bode well for doing an Instagram live on this topic, but that's where I'm at. So let me know, share with us what your personal weather forecast is. And as we get started, I wanted to take a moment to just let you all know that as more folks come in, the Building Movement Project is a national nonprofit. We produce tools, resources, and reports to strengthen social change nonprofits and people working on social change. You can find out more about us at buildingmovement.org, join our newsletter, keep up to date with what we are doing on a daily basis when it comes to supporting social change. And as I mentioned earlier, this is part of a series on the 10 social change roles explained. And this particular series is focused on a framework that I developed and put out in the past year that is all about how we can identify our roles when it comes to addressing the important issues and causes that we care about. And if you're familiar with the social change framework, we'll drop the link into the chat, but it basically has three components to it. One component is our values, and that is in the middle of the framework itself. And those values could be whatever you personally feel connected to. Liberation, justice, equity. The second aspect of the framework is related to the roles, the 10 social change roles. And the framework invites you to think about which roles do you show up in most? Which roles do you aspire to play? And those roles can be taken as individuals, but they can also be taken as an organization or a coalition, a volunteer group, a campus group, whatever it is that you are part of. And then the third aspect of this framework is that it is an ecosystem. So just as in nature, in our bodies, there are ways that we are interdependent and connected to other things and other beings in the same way, the ecosystem framework is all about how we're in relationship to each other and understanding that conflict is inevitable and that it is part of the relationship building that builds the trust and makes our social change efforts even more powerful. So those are the three parts of the framework. You can find it in my Linktree bio in the Building Movement Projects and the like. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking about healing and healers, and I think it's very apt. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is a really challenging time for, I think, all of us, right? Many of you in the chat talked about your personal weather forecast, and some of you saying overcast, some of you saying a little stormy. I said I was feeling foggy. If you're just joining us, feel free to share what it is that you are feeling vis-a-vis the weather inside yourself. I see some sunny outlooks, some partly cloudies. So it is so apt to talk about healing right now because, just in this week, over the past month, right, we have been hearing about what is happening in occupied Palestine. We have been celebrating, but also seeing the impact of what is happening with Asian American Pacific Islander communities during Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Today is the 1 year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd and the beginning of the uprisings that followed. There is the pandemic that continues to create tremendous grief and loss here in the US, but around the world, including where I'm from in India. And on top of all that, right, I think tomorrow is a full lunar eclipse. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot that we're holding space for. And so however you are coming into space, you are welcome. And we're so glad that you're here. So we're talking again about healers who are such critical aspects of the social change ecosystem. So before I introduce my guest, my friend, whom I'm so excited I was able to get on their calendar, I wanted to just, set it up a little bit, right? So social change, we often say, is a struggle. And every struggle needs to include joy and it needs to include healing, right? And healers come in lots of different forms. Some practice healing justice. Others are somatic or Reiki practitioners. Others are counselors or social workers or a friend in need, right, who's there for us. What they all share in common is the ability to really identify and empathize with intergenerational and intersectional trauma. What they share in common is that they can provide individuals and organizations with resources and care and practices to address conflict, to move through personal trauma, or to hold accountability. And that's why healers are so important in our spaces. So with that, I'm really, really excited to introduce you to someone who has actually served that role in my own life when I was going through some grief and loss years ago, and has been a person who has provided healing for so many people and so many organizations in their work. So I'm going to see if I can have Rochelle Faithful join us. Hi, Rochelle.
Hey, Deepa. So good to see you.
It's great to see you. Thank you for being here. So
Thanks for
I'm
the
going to
invitation.
introduce you to everyone, if that's okay. I know that I'm not going to read everything because I also want to get into our conversation and hear more about your work. But Rochelle is a multidisciplinary folk healing artist and healing justice practitioner who's rooted in the African diasporic tradition of conjure. And hopefully we'll get to talk about that a little bit. They were born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Virginia with a strong affinity to their Southern family line in Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. Rochelle supports national and local activists of all backgrounds, particularly leaders of Black liberation movements, and they are known for creating spaces that really invest into healing justice frameworks. And their work has been featured in many places, including Color Lines, The Root, Everyday Feminism, and the HuffPost. And Rochelle also publishes their own words in several books and law review articles. Welcome, Rochelle. So happy to
Thank
have you.
you.
I know you already have a lot of fans joining us, so if folks have questions for Rochelle, please add them into the chat. So Rochelle, I just wanted to start off and just get into it. I wanted to ask you, what experiences have shaped your journey to where you are today?
Thank you. Thanks for holding this space with me, especially because I am not the most active on Instagram. So it's fun to be in conversation with some of our overlapping communities for sure. And I think for me, I think it's rare that people seek out to be healers. I think more often we find ourselves called, and I think the same is true for me, where I always had a disposition of a lot of like bridge building, peacekeeping when I was younger. And as I got older and also got more engaged in movement, those core parts of me didn't change, that disposition to want to help people understand each other, to build relationship, to grow together. And at the same time, I did, and I continue to be deeply invested in knowing that our conditions need to change fundamentally. So at different points, different things were asked of me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I say asked of me, I mean both like an internal sense of like I had to grow into something different, as well as like I'm not surprisingly really connected to spirit. And I know that means many different things to many different people. So I mean that as broadly as I'm suggesting. But I felt called to come into different roles. So initially that meant I was kind of the person who informally held conflict among my friends and comrades. And then I found myself more drawn to meditation spaces and found that as balm for myself as well as the communities that I was a part of. Then I was asked to come more into a role of thinking about this role of healing justice. And I was grateful to be part of that framework as it was developing early, about 20 years ago, when I was organizing and based deeper in the South.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, those were the first moments I was called into like, are you in your body as you're doing this work? What does your heart long for?
Mm-hmm.
And can you envision yourself doing this work in 30, 40, 50 years? And the kind of organizing I was doing full time did not allow me to envision any of those things. So healing justice brought me into those realities. So I was called to that at the time. And then there are a few different iterations. I was called to come back to myself through traditional healing. So I was called to come into the healing arts and learn about shamanism. Certainly did grow up with a framework around that, but to learn about it and then increasingly over time to play different roles. So I'm grateful at this moment I'm meeting you, having a better integration of all those different healing roles. But to me, the thing that weaves them together is healing, whether it is doing one-on-one traditional folk healing support for folks, whether it's as a death doula and holding grief space for people, which apparently is a very important skill to have right now. Or even as a strategist, someone who's trying to build out our capacity to think about not having healing as this thing we do after we do the work or to the side, but how it's really a core piece of how we're thinking about our safety and well-being as we do transformative, life-saving, life-changing work. So that's a little bit of my story. I know we all have different stories. That's a little bit of mine. And one thing I do want to add, Deepa, just because I think it's always important for me to set the stage, is that I think all of us have healing capacities and can shift into this role of healer as all the other like 10 roles that you've described. I think many of us are holding multiple roles at once, and many of us are called into different roles at different times. So I'm grateful to play and occupy this role now. I think it's one I will always play. And I don't think I'm special. I think I bring particular skills that make it easier for me to play this role right now. And I invite all of us to think about our different skills, talents, gifts, and superpowers that we can bring into this moment. Because as you said, there's so much happening. Um, I think I know we're going to survive and see ourselves into the future.
Mm-hmm.
But I think to do so, it's going to require all of us actually to put our gifts and talents into the collective.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. And that was I took like a half a page of notes while you were speaking. I wanted to capture everything you said, and I'm glad this is being videotaped so I can go back. But I really and so many folks are also resonating with what you said in the chat if you want to take a look. But I really resonated with how you talked about being called both within and from the outside. And I think that it's so clear that you can obviously hear your own inner voice as you are trying to align with what is being asked of you. So I just want to hold that and appreciate you for that. It's a lesson for, I think, all of us. Also wanted to lift up what you said, that all of us have the ability to do healing. And as you said, when you were younger, you were kind of managing or mediating conflicts with friends in a particular way. And that too is healing, right? So I think it's so important that with this role, but all of the roles, it's not as though there's a job title that says healer next to one's name. It's really about building the capacity to bring those strengths in, just as you said. So thank you for sharing your trajectory, and I want to dip into some of those pieces with you as we keep talking. But the one part I want to dive into, because I don't know if folks fully, might not appreciate what it means, right, is how would you characterize the healing justice framework? What are the components of it?
Thank you. I love this question. And it's an exciting time for healing justice to get the shine that it needs, because it really is, I think, the framework that is for these moments. So it's a framework that both, existed before we called it a framework. So it's always important to talk about the indigeneity of all of our technologies,
Mm-hmm.
including how we just know how to care for ourselves and be well and be safe as we are in movement or struggling for liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular framework, in the way that we know it, really was developed in the Southeast US by a lot of Black feminist movement workers, as well as those in solidarity with them.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, the first and most important people to name is Kindred, Southern Healing Justice Collective, which now has a great online presence for folks to check them out. But they really were the people that were coming together very early on and saying, people in our movements are dying, right? They're actually just, they're not only dying of police violence or, because of ICE or all the other reasons that we know that the state can be harmful to us, but they're dying because they're in movements for a long time,
Right.
um, or they can't stand to be in movement, right? It actually kills them. So what is happening, and what do we need to be doing differently? Um, I think not surprisingly, many of these people were women, trans, non-binary folks too, who were also carrying a lot of the care labor, right, of trying to hold folks and hold us as we were doing this work, but also doing it in the ways that didn't envision our futures. So a lot of their work in this framework was catalyzed through Hurricane Katrina,
Mm.
um, and later through some other important, this kind of like global events that occurred that really just sharpened the lens of movements that actually made people disposable, right?
Yeah.
Movements that wanted to use up our bodies, our strategies, our labor until we couldn't do it anymore. So this is a framework that says, actually, the way we want to be a movement is recognizing that we're building on legacies that already existed, um, that actually know how to sustain us if we allow them to. So some of the things that are centered in healing justice, and Kara Page talks a lot about this very beautifully in a lot of different spaces, for those of you who may not be familiar with her work. And she often says, like, it's not only her, it's Kindred Collective, right? But she is I think articulates and models this really beautifully, which is, we're thinking about our collective safety,
Mm-hmm.
and whether that's surveillance, which, we have shared communities like
Yeah.
lineages around surveillance, um, or other ways that the state continues to make us unsafe. We really have to understand that this is not only an organizing strategy from people in direct action on the front line role, but this is actually for healers, for us to be thinking about, right? How can healers be present
Mm-hmm.
so that people can think about their safety and also be safe in real time? But also, let's think about the framework invites us to think about generationally what we need, um, especially if we can't rely on the medical industrial complex to keep us well.
Mm-hmm.
What do we need to think about environmentally so that we have conditions around us that don't make us sick,
Mm-hmm.
as well as allow us to regenerate within these healthier environmental spaces, right? The ecosystems. Um, and it asks us to just think about our well-being as being a central part of our strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that we're not thinking about that secondarily. And that can look a lot of different ways, and there's a ton of different stories. I will share that I worked for a couple years with Thick Press. You may have seen this on my Instagram, Deepa, but
Mm-hmm. Yes.
it's a project's called Book Emerging. The title of this work is Together at the Edge of the World on Healing Justice. But we actually capture some of we had an interview with Kindred, so they tell more of this story for folks who are interested. So I suggest checking out that Book Emerging, Together at the Edge of the World, for folks to understand more about the lineage here. But it's healing justice can be as simple as how we organize around someone in our community who's experiencing deep grief, right? Like there are a number of people in the community I know who've lost multiple people, right, in a short period of time. So are we showing up to make sure that they're being fed? Do they need loving touch to support them right now? Do they just need to be checked in on? Are they worried about holding their work at the same time? Are there ways that we can shift some of those responsibilities so that they can tend to themselves among us, right? To things like, folks are wanting to reconnect to the ancestral land or their ancestral traditions, to search them with a sense of fortification for these times ahead, right? So how do we create altar space? How do we engage in somatic practices that are actually part of our tradition and culture? How do we even just learn how to breathe together before we launch into our strategy work?
Right.
So that we feel like we have space to do this. So the framework doesn't have to be complex at all. It can be really simple, but it's really just allowing our well-being and our fullness and our human complexity to be at the center of our movement work, and not for it to be siloed or an afterthought.
Right. Thank you for that. I feel like you also shared a lot of the situations and examples where healing justice can offer resource and scaffolding, whether it's individually or in organizational spaces, movement spaces. But I wanted to probe this piece that you just said, Rochelle, because I know that it's definitely been true in my life, where the healing part is an afterthought, if at all. It's, as you said, secondary. And sometimes you don't, well, I'll speak for myself. I didn't really understand it until it kind of hit me in the face, and I think there's so much of this work that I found I was sort of going through very numb in a way, especially a lot of the work I did post 9/11, where you just kind of get used to just doing it. You just have to be the quote frontline responder, going back to the map. And you get this muscle of numbness that you just kind of muscle through, right? And so I'm curious, how can we as individual activists or people working in movement spaces center healing from the get-go? What are some ways we can do that so that we're not actually encountering it in a darker tunnel down the road?
That's a perfect question. And also, I will answer that question along with another question in the chat about what well-being means. I think it's an incredibly subjective experience of what well-being means. But essentially, it's a way for me, it's a way that I try to understand being in balance and alignment in all parts of myself. So what that balance means will look different at different moments, even for you, right? Because even there are moments I negotiate with myself of like, I know I need to kind of get through X to do Y. So my balance is going to look different than it might usually look.
Right.
And the alignment is also something that is across dimensions as well. I think about alignment not only about like alignment with my values, which is very important to me emotionally, but also psychically, physically, all the other dimensions that you might identify as like allows you to feel well in the world and allow you to be most present and most you, right? You are a unique aspect being in this constellation of movement and constellation of the world, right? So whatever that allows you to bring vitality into the world is what well-being means, at least to me. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But I've been using well-being instead of wholeness because I recognize that for some people, especially from a disability justice lens, right, wholeness can imply that like if you're less than whole,
Right.
like you're less human or less than. So well-being to me really identifies like that sentiment of it's like what that balance and alignment means. I think what I really want to encourage all of us to continue doing is first just ask yourself the best questions you can ask and to be honest about them.
Mm-hmm.
It is an imperfect tension. I experience it all the time myself of like, I should stretch more before I do physically active things, even though like I'm grateful I'm able to do more physically active things because that actually makes me really happy as an athlete, right? That that allows me to be well. Um, and I can list all the other things I'm not doing, as well as some things I feel like I'm doing really well. But I think the important thing for most of us to be asking about is like, am I aware of actually what I need?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think so many of us in movement, whether we come from the caregiving role or we are guides or some other parts of the role ecosystem, and depending on our identities, right? We can be really conditioned to respond well to people, to feel really responsible, or, and this is also because of the economic system we live in, right? Can constantly feel like there is no time. We can't afford to do the things that we even know that we need. Sometimes that's true, right? There are literal structural barriers to get what we need. Though I feel like if we collectivize, usually those barriers can dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, there might be an unwillingness, right? Because we have a sense that there's actually the time that we need to invest is always ahead of us, right? So there's white supremacy urgency of like we have to do all the thing all the time, and then there's like the discernment around urgency of like, yes, we know that there are actual urgent things happening, but there are always choices about how we can show up. So usually I don't want to be prescriptive about like the rituals that you need to
Mm-hmm.
do or the things you have to do, but I do want folks to be asking some similar questions that I know that have helped me, which is, um, what do I actually need?
Right.
Can I continue to organize and prioritize around those things and trust that the rest is going to fall in place?
Mm-hmm.
Or trust that I could ask others to hold other pieces? Or trust that maybe it's not that important, all the things I think I need to do, right? So it's really about
Yeah.
sometimes just reprioritizing and reordering what we value. And if we want to be doing movement a long time, and I'm grateful to have relationship with movement elders who've been in it a long time, I've seen how they protected
Mm.
themselves from all these other pressures, internally as well as externally, around what they think they have to do, and exercising a lot of discernment around what they need, what is the most important,
Mm-hmm.
how we can collectivize to get it done,
Mm.
um, and can we have the timelines work for us rather than the timelines dictate what we do.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you. I think all of those are markers for ourselves. And from what you also said earlier, Rochelle, it sounds like those kinds of markers can exist in the movement spaces we're into when we're in it together with folks. Like you mentioned, what kinds of are we breathing before we talk strategy? Are we setting some community agreements around how we hold space for conflict,
Yep.
recognizing that it's absolutely inevitable, in that kind of tension is inevitable, but how do we hold it in a generative way? It seems like those are all ways for us to prioritize and center healing rather than wait until something happens, even in our movement tables, movement, dynamics, right? Movement
Yeah,
culture, and then deal with it later.
absolutely. Yeah, and it really can be as simple as those practices and strategies, and really just using time to our advantage.
Yeah.
Um, I do believe in the arc of change, especially now being in movement like close to 20 years. And a lot can happen if you give yourself time. So let's give ourselves some time, some
Yeah.
room to grow. And I think a lot generates from there. So I appreciate you bringing those examples forward too, Deepa.
Yeah, and I think that I learned about this a little bit just a few weeks ago, when someone actually made this discernment for me, as you did, around white supremacy urgency and what is happening urgency, and then, how we actually meet those urgencies. The discernment, I think, is so important. I struggle with it all the time. But I think it is important for us to start making those discernments and to take some pauses, because we're always sort of going, when it comes to this work. I want to see if folks have questions. If you do, please feel free to share. Someone did ask about white supremacy urgency, and another question around this work is necessary and draining. I love that folks are talking to each other here. I wonder if
Yeah.
energetic boundaries can help with this. If you want to take either of those or not, feel free, Rochelle, but I want to invite you to do that.
Sure, yeah, I'll take both really quickly. So supremacy urgency, at least for me, is a reference to the really popular Tema Okun white supremacy characteristics tool that's been out there for a while, and I know it's about to be updated, which should be cool. Um, but white supremacy urgency to me is just like a constant sense of urgency. There's no discernment. We are always going because we want to be bigger, better, and have more progress. And that is the pathway to burnout, among other things. So that is distinct from urgency, which to me is like just more of a discernment. And Deepa, as you said, like what is happening at this moment, there are really important things where we have to move. So that is a discernment we have to make, though, about like when we actually need to move, and when there's this kind of false sense that we have to always just be moving, right? So in fact, I think it was last year as the pandemic was really coming down here in DC. I was just sharing with friends. I'm like, I'm being still because I just come from a tradition that has helped me discern when to move and when to not move. And I lean on that tradition and that wisdom to be just like, this is the moment to be still and to observe and to perceive. In terms of energetic boundaries, absolutely. This is, and whether you are, depending how into energetics you are or not, I think all of us are aware of our personal space right now, right? In ways that maybe we've never been before. So I think if we are actually paying attention to our personal space, we can be aware of like, do I feel out of balance? Do I feel in alignment? Do I just feel like a lot of things around me that I just don't feel like are my feelings, my responsibility, or actually arising from my own desires, right? And that's the stuff that we can identify and be choiceful about. And when I say be choiceful about, either just like be in the habit of clearing it and just like energetically, that's important. And the other thing to energetic boundaries, I think some people forget, is that you can be choiceful emotionally, right? As well as like logistically around protecting your time and energy, right? Do you want to make different choices? Can you make different choices? What are the choices that are available to you so that you are not just constantly to taking things in to getting expert at offloading them and clearing them? We can make the choices we need to make so that we are actually taking less in or more discerning or more selective about what comes here. So yeah, I know there are other healers here and we can talk all day
I
about
can tell. I love
yeah,
it. I love
the
it. I'm
energetic
learning.
boundaries piece, but yeah, it's remember
I
those
didn't even know
pieces.
what that was. So I learned a lot. No, I think, we're coming to the end of our live soon. So folks, if you have more questions for Rochelle, so please share. But I really appreciate, scarcity and urgency are characteristics of our movement spaces. And even I think those of us who do this work, and the kind of the response to that, or a different way of thinking about it around, discernment. And thank you to the person who just wrote this in. Thank you for the valuing of discernment and stillness, right? The ability to observe. I really appreciate that, because I think that does give us some ways of thinking about how we hit the pause button, not the stop button, but just the pause button, to just sit still and connect with spirit and connect with what we already know from the work we've done in the past, and learn from it. So I appreciate that. So we talked a lot, Rochelle, about the qualities that healers have. We've talked about the different ways in which healers can show up in our spaces, and as support for individuals, and how they're not after the fact folks that we go to, but really integrated within our ecosystems. So and how healers support activists and movement folks and movement spaces. So now I want to ask you, what do healers need? As you think about, even you don't have to use the map at all as a reference point, but just for folks who might be familiar with it, this idea of an ecosystem, and healers are in that ecosystem. And I often talk about how, the roles are complementary. We take care of each other. Like frontline responders really do need to see if they have caregivers and healers in their ecosystem, right? And visionaries often need builders who can actually take their North Star visions and make them a reality. So similarly, or not, for healers, what is it that you feel healers need to continue doing this, the work that healers are called upon to do?
This is a great question. I can think of three things, and they're not dissimilar to what some other roles I think might need. But even healers more so, because I think there's a current disparity where there's a lot of demand for the skills and experience that some of us might have, and not as much support. So I really appreciate you asking this question. So I think the first thing is making sure that you are resourcing your healers, right? If we're asking folks to hold space for us, and we really want to value them and honor their time, then please meet the requests of what they need monetarily and otherwise. I think that's really critical. And I appreciate folks who have supported me over the years in my practice too, especially those who had more than what they needed in surplus. I'm just like, we're dedicating this to you to also make your work available to others who don't have those resources, right? So there's been a really, I think, generous reparative justice framework that can help happen in the ecosystem toward healers to make sure that their ecosystem can get through these moments. I think the second thing too is time. Healers need their time to regenerate and to rest. So if we're kind of constantly calling on them, we have to just be aware that they're going to need their time as well. And I'm grateful that there are more healers that are publicly taking sabbaticals or scaling back their practice. I'm scaled back my practice a little bit so I can write and provide more support to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about getting back to one-on-one work, because that's lifeblood for me. But I want to resource us. So thank you for giving me the time. And folks have been super supportive of that. So that's been wonderful support for me. I think the third thing too is, as we're thinking about these other roles too, it's go ahead and bring in your healers, because they have great insight to how the ecosystem's actually doing. And they have great insight about some things that can support the ecosystem as a whole that we might overlook if we are not, holding the space in the ways that they're holding it. So make sure you bring in your healers to think about next steps, strategies, and just bring them in thinking about the work ahead, because they really do know what's going on, and you don't want to overlook that incredible information. So those are three things I would mention.
Those are great. Thank you. And I know that you are also doing some scale backs, right? At this point.
Just on my one-on-one practice, yeah. Okay. So I am grateful to have many different lines of work in the healing work. So I do a fair amount of consulting for the strategy work and for the conflict work. So that's continuing. I'm grateful to have some more time also to be building out some infrastructure there, especially around the conflict piece, which is a whole different conversation, but I'm looking
Yes.
forward to having that. Um, and then on the kind of one-on-one side, I am shifting from like pausing, seeing about 6 to 8 people a week in active support to doing some writing about generational cycles and how we heal through generational harm. So I am grateful to just be shifting work and scaling back a little bit to have some time to be also replenishing myself and making sure that I am clear
Yeah.
at this moment with all the demand that we have. Yeah.
So folks do want to reach out to Rochelle, knowing that they have certain boundaries, right? That they're keeping. It's RochelleFaithful.com.
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's right.
Okay. We'll put
Yeah.
that into the notes when we share this out too. Rochelle, thank you so much. I really feel like I kind of want to keep going, but I know we can't, and we have to understand that everyone has time and space and be respectful. But I want to close by saying I'm so grateful to you for your presence. I am so grateful to you for how you actually are strengthening ecosystems, because I think that's such an important point, that you know what the health of an ecosystem is, because you're working with different aspects of it. And we should ask healers, how are our movement spaces doing, because you probably have this bird's eye view of it, right? That you can weave together different through lines. So I appreciate you strengthening individuals. I appreciate the work that you do with movement spaces, and also just to share like this. You said you were like a newbie to Instagram. I think you got it. You're like answering questions, weaving everything through. You have it down.
Turn this thing on. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I also have the same issue every time. But I wanted to close with a couple of things. One is, I don't know that you'll remember this, Rochelle, but when we had been working together, I think a couple of weeks after one of our sessions, you sent me some rose quartz in the mail. And it was really important to me because it was unsolicited. You did it, and you were basically helping me ask that question: what does my heart need? And it is a gesture that I honestly think about all the time, to the point where I actually have a lot of rose quartz now in my home, and I give it away to lots of people who visit me. Just as you gave me rose quartz, I am giving rose quartz to others who also are in the process of asking what does their heart need. So I just want you to know that cycle is happening through me and then others that you started. So thank you for that.
That's incredible. Thank you.
And then to everyone else, thank you for being here, for being so present. This was just such a rich conversation, and there will be more like these. So every month we do an Instagram live talking about a particular role in the ecosystem. I'm not sure what June is, but we'll get that information out to you soon. Follow us here at Building Movement Project. Follow me at Deepa Iyer. Follow Rochelle. And please stay in touch, and please take care of your hearts and take care of your ecosystem. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rochelle. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.